Hello, SJ. Welcome to Pimprenelle. I'm very pleased to have you and to interview you today. So I'm going to quickly introduce you. So you did a Bachelor of Science in Neurosciences at the University of St. Andrews in the UK. You are right now a master's student in the University of Oxford in International and Comparative Education. But you were also a business analyst intern at McKinsey, and you have a lot of experience of research in science. But before we delve into that, the first thing I want to ask you is, could you please introduce yourself? Where are you from? And from a more like a student perspective, like what type of students were you in your K through 12 education, and did you enjoy school? So that's a lot of questions.
But we'll pack it. We'll unpack it bit by bit. I'm SJ. I'm 22, so still very young. I grew up in Jakarta, Indonesia. My family is from Sumatra, but they moved like way early on to Jakarta. So basically, I went to the same institution. It was a private school from early childhood education until I graduated in grade 12. And then I moved to Scotland to start my uni and then just remain in the UK until then. But yeah, so I went, when I was going through school in Jakarta, I stayed in the same school. I think I only moved from early childhood education near my house to like a 45-minute away, different location to do like my kindergarten up until senior year in like 2020. But I was always like a pretty good student, joy to have in class. I wasn't, I don't think I was the loudest voice in the classroom. I was pretty loud, both in like chatting and also answering questions. But I think that's also because I had the privilege of having some really good teachers. So I think when I started really enjoying school was probably like in middle school. I was in a classroom and I had like these two homeroom teachers that were just so lovely, Mr. Bahrain and Miss Nicole. Up until now, I still talk to them. I think they were so influential in like the way that I think, and like I actually was looking forward to go to school a lot of the time. Mostly because like I think in primary school and middle school, like children are not the nicest people. I did not used to look like this. So I used to get like a bunch of like teasing remarks or like whatever, and I think I was a very sensitive kid.
So you feel that what made your education especially enjoyable for you was the fact that you were able to have a close relationship with your teachers?
Yeah, I think this is, that was absolutely like a privilege that was in my school, and perhaps not in like other schools, because since I've talked to other, like some of the teachers that have moved schools, and like, to be honest, like from other schools' perspective, what my school had in terms of like teacher-student relationships was like borderline inappropriate. Like we would...
From what you're telling me, I can understand that like the type of relationship you had with your teachers were very privileged in the sense that like you were able to like connect with them, and maybe it wasn't the case in other schools. So were you in a private or public school?
So I was in a private school. It's not an international one, it's a national plus one. So we had to do the American system by day, and then like after school we would have extra tutoring sessions for the Indonesian curriculum, because we still, like, I think I was the last batch of high school students graduating when they had to do like the national examination. So it was honestly like, I still stand by this today. Like I've never been as tired as I was in high school, and I think it was because like my school already had very long hours between like 7:30 until 4:15, and then we would have extra tutoring classes from 4:30 until like sometimes 9:30 p.m., 10:30 p.m. And that just killed me. I swear, like human beings are not supposed to be like doing that. But I still had some really great teachers. I mean, there are some teachers who are trying their best, and there's some who are just really excellent at it. And so our batch, or at least in my school, like batches of students aren't that big. Like we only had, my batch only had like 100 students graduating. And so it was really easy to like foster close relationships with teachers. And we would have like advisors who are like quite close to us. And it was, I'm not sure if this is like, this might not be the policy in like other schools, but in our schools, usually we would contact each other by like WhatsApp or like using Line. And I think like there was even, I think it definitely had its benefits, because you get to, I guess, see your teachers as humans as well. Like I had people in my school who did not really have very great home situations. And so it also made it easier for students to like open up. And I think a lot of them ran on the principle of like, you're not just teaching, you're also educating. And so we had like students who had difficulty getting up in the morning because of like family reasons. And so we had teachers who took the initiative to like, call them, be like, yo, like, what's up? Like, why are you not in school? Like, or wake up, like, I need to see you in class. And also give like, not just a, like a teaching stick, but also like a listening ear.
Yeah.
So I think I really valued that. Well, I was in like middle school and like high school. Yeah.
You did like your primary and high school education and secondary education in an international school, or did you switch?
It was a national plus one. I never went to international school.
Okay, it was a national school, so it was Indonesian curriculum, or
I guess it was. We were doing kind of like an Indonesian curriculum integrated with American principles.
Okay.
So yeah, they were still teaching us like stuff in the curriculum of the national curriculum, really.
Yeah.
And we had to take like the examinations, but then if somebody wanted to apply for like universities abroad, then they would be taking like the SAT and the AP and stuff like that. And
did you do it?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Bro, that was like, what a time. Like, I had to do like SATs, AP exams, AP classes. All in all, like it was a lot of work, but it got me to where I am, really.
Was it a religious school?
It wasn't a very religious school, no.
But religion was included?
So in Indonesia, it's like mandatory for you to have religion classes.
Okay.
Not so much in the case of like actual international schools who use like IB curriculums or like...
and so were your parents like supportive in your education? Are they educated and were they able, like, for example, to help you with your homeworks, that kind of things?
Yeah. My parents were honestly like their number one support would be to education for me. They were really like, I think they were super strict growing up, and when I was like a child, I used to have like every 30-minute block in my day printed out with a schedule. And like, here's my school, here's all the extra lessons that I had to do, here's like I don't know, like go to dance school this, go to music school that, like go learn this language, go do a twirl and like a lap, and like you'll play the piano at it too. So I really despised that growing up. Really? I was like, dude, oh my god, I was not an okay child. I actually felt so bad for my parents because like obviously they're pouring like love and money and like time out to put me in these like classes, and I'd just be like, no, I don't want to go. Like whenever I'd hold like demonstrations of my own soul, like 7-year-old self, I'd be like, I have a fever or whatever. But honestly, like now I see the merit in it. This is also because both my parents are obviously, they're very like, okay, not obviously, but like my parents are very educated.
Okay.
My mom and my dad, they both were very bright children, and right now adults who are still working. Oh, my dad's retired. But yeah, no, my mom is just like one of those people that like, they're just smart. Like they won't study that much, but then they would just get really, really good grades. Okay. Yeah, they're very education first and everything.
Okay, see. And I know that you studied like neuroscience, right? In St. Andrews, and right now you're studying education. So I have 2 questions for you. The first one is like, how do you think, like, why did you decide to shift from neuroscience to education? That's the first one.
Oh my god. When I was choosing like my majors for my undergrad, because my parents are both engineers, my mom is of the opinion of like, sorry, I'm not sure if this might offend like some people, but my mom is very much of the opinion of like, unless you have a STEM degree, you're not going to be very credible, especially because me being a woman, like it's going to be very hard for people to listen to what I have to say. And I could do whatever I want later when I'm older, but as long as I've got like some like a STEM credential, that will still make people like stop and listen a little bit to you at least. And I think this comes from a lot of personal experience with her being like in corporate. And so she was really never like entertaining me to do like arts or humanities, because she's always just like, do this first and then after you can do whatever you want. So I was doing neuroscience. That was a whole like other accident as well, because actually I wanted to do biology and I didn't make the grades for it. I was really good at psychology, but I didn't want to do psychology. So when I was applying, I saw neuroscience and I made the grades. And I was like, okay, lol, whatever, I'll just apply. And then I got in, and it sounded pretty cool. So that's why I think I've always been doing neuroscience, not because I wanted to, but because I could. And not a lot of people can say that. So yeah, basically I just kind of was floating through my 4 years of like undergrad, and then just being like, after this is done, I'm just gonna let this go and like close this chapter behind me. I was so excited to finish. I really enjoyed my last year, to be fair. I think that was more of like the social sciences of neuroscience. And I did do my dissertation in public communication and education as well.
Okay.
So I think it was a whole like load of factors that led me to do education now. In like the first term of my last year of my senior year of undergrad, I did this class, and it was called Teaching and Communication in Science. So this wasn't really a normal class. It was a class that you had to apply for and like get selected and everything. And so what it was I became a undergraduate student ambassador for the university. But I was placed in a school where I had to teach science for like a whole semester. And the class that I was placed in, it's in a town called Crail. It's so lovely if you go. It's a tiny little town. The class that they placed me in was a P6-7 class. So they were around like 11, 12 years in age. And they were extremely rowdy. But I was tasked with like, okay, all right, help them out with science. Like, you got to make things fun and interesting, and also help a poor like teacher out, because she was drowning in everything. I think the class was around like 24 kids. So it was a lot.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, so I really enjoyed that experience, and I think like being with the children and like teaching them and has really just sparked like, it was so fun. It was so fun for me. It really just sparked like something in me. And after that, I took another class called Narratives that Shape Psychology and Neuroscience. So initially, I didn't really think that there was a connection between these two. The second class that I did, it was taught by a married couple called, their names were Erin Robbins and Akira O'Connor. And they really honestly just shaped changed my worldview in that instant. When you take a class so influential that you're just like still reeling from it now. So they did this thing where they wrote a book, and then they had a class to learn about the book to their to the undergrads. It wasn't a very popular class, which really surprised me, but it was basically about like how and why have we learned to think about psychology and neuroscience in the way that we do, and in the way that we learn it. Like, who decided what we were going to learn? What are the existing power structures that kind of like reinforce problems within psychology and neuroscience? Why do we see STEM as purely objective when it's so rooted in like historical white men? It's rooted in like this exclusive kind of culture of like being in like men's clubs, being in like research groups, like with university only being accessible to men at the time. Then what does it mean for like for us moving forward now? Things like bad pharma, I don't know, it just really honestly revolutionized like the way that I think, because I've never really thought about education in that way before. I've always just been like a very, I said before that I was a pretty good student, but I never really like had, I think I've like sometimes critically considered what I was studying, but it wasn't like so encouraged that it would be so clear in your face. And I think that I'm bright enough to at least understand some of that when I was like, below 18. But I think I can think of like some of my peers, no offense to them, that wouldn't really like, they would just consume it without really critically thinking about it. So yeah, I think it was really just kind of like a wake up call. I started reading like a bunch of like hooks and everything.
Yeah.
I started reading some Freire. I started going to like their office hours. And in university, I was not the type of person to go to like office hours. I did not enjoy neuroscience to the degree that I would, come up to a professor and be like, you need to tell me more about this, or like whatever. So yeah, I think like I enjoyed the class, but I didn't really think about its impact on me until I got the interview for this course. And I read one by Aliyah, and I think it was her Silence Voice Binary
amazing
one.
research.
Yes, yeah. And she talks about something called epistemological revolution.
Yeah.
And when I read that bit, it was like something just, I had one of that, basically. And yeah, so I started thinking about like, okay, I have a chance to talk about
Yeah.
talk about education.
Yeah,
of children.
we're gonna delve into that. But
Yeah,
wait,
yeah.
I have a question from what you just mentioned
Yeah.
a bit earlier. You said that like you started really engaging with neuroscience. I mean, you were engaged already, but really engaging like more critically with neuroscience when you started learning about like how it was like white-centered and Euro-centered. So do you have an example of that? How like, for example, like the way we teach about like STEM in general and maybe especially neuroscience can be very biased as well? Because I think this bias can be hard to spot for people who doesn't know anything about
Okay,
it.
yeah. Sorry, I think I just dropped like a
Yeah,
little tidbit in there without explaining it.
yeah, because that was really interesting, and I am pretty sure like people are interested in that.
So maybe I like this. Okay, I like this example. It's kind of sad to hear about, but IQ testing. I mean, we can say a lot of things about like measurements and like how we define intelligence really, but you know, IQ tests have become so mainstream, like, and it's like it's household language, and it's just kind of like what is like universally accepted as like a measure of your intelligence. So the IQ test was developed, forgot the exact year, but it was based on a sample of white students. And so you get all these questions, and perhaps it's valid with like the students back then, but it wasn't universal at all. And so for us to adopt that into a measure of intelligence that, you know, comes from this no, not even predominantly, all white sample, it's so ridiculous. And so I think another psychologist, God, I forgot his name, he developed a version of the IQ test. And what instead he used is AVE. So he formulated questions that were similar to those asked in the IQ test, but just in an English not commonly understood by white people. So
oh, interesting.
yeah,
How
so
the language can be like centered also on a certain ethnicity
exactly.
that will favor like the white over like other communities. Very interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
so actually he called it the bitch 100. So it's the Black Intelligence Test of Cultural Homogeneity. I think that is the correct like thingy. But yeah, he called it the bitch 100 because he really just wanted to take a piss at like the IQ test. And so what he did was he tested it on both white students and black students, and you know, lo and behold, black students performed so much better than white students on this bitch 100, which, you know, is literally the equivalent to the IQ test, but just in a language that's more catered towards like, you know, the African American communities, the US at the time. So sadly, this test has been lost to time. Nobody has like the original copy. There's only like a few sample questions left. But you know, this kind of research and this kind of realization was just it's so eye-opening to the way that we do science now. And it's just not like it's not as black and white as like many people think.
Do you feel that this colonization of knowledge also happens in Indonesia's school curriculums?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like if we have like a colonization aspect, for sure.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, please? Yeah. So when I first learned about like decolonization and everything, also from this class, so I think Indonesia is in a very interesting position of having been colonized and been a colonizer. So we were colonized by the English, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Japanese. Whole crews come around to play.
The Dutch, were they the main one? Because I know they colonized Indonesia for like more than 300 years.
Yeah,
right?
It was like 350.
Even in language in Indonesian, like gratis. Some similarities with Dutch language.
Yeah. So we had that, and then I think in terms of like education system, it's pretty interesting because I think the Dutch and the Japanese had such a different approach to education while they were colonizing Indonesia. So the Dutch, the Japanese at least, they tried to they gave us a whole new education system. Right now we still follow it. So primary school is 6 years, middle school is 3 years, high school is 3 years. But they wanted us to, you know, as saviors of Asia, or like the light of the East, or the rising sun. They wanted us to be able to like stand on our own 2 feet with like a bayonet in the back of our head. I don't know. But yeah, basically like they gave us an education system, and we still use it. We built upon it. The Dutch, on the other hand, what was unlucky about it was that they didn't want us to be educated. They didn't give us school. So there wasn't even like a brainwashing or anything. They just didn't want us to be on the same level as them. And so schools were not commonplace. Only the wealthiest could afford to send their children to school, and even then they would still go to school abroad in the Netherlands. So we didn't get a lot of like legacies in terms of like learning from them. But what was it was like a common tactic. It was like kind of like the kind of like divide and conquer, but because we weren't schooled, we didn't have like a common language, because there's over 3,500 ethnic groups in Indonesia. We live in islands, so there's no way for us to communicate with each other effectively. Just so like we could say in front of their faces like, oh, we're gonna overthrow you tomorrow, by the way, you know, just so they couldn't, you know, let us plan behind their backs when they weren't looking. So yeah, I mean, essentially what ended up happening was when we established a national language and we could talk in that national language together and build dialogue with like other, I think youth organizations were really like prominent in like this movement. We had a bunch that were just having these intellectual conversations about like, I think we should go. I think we should like, you know, stand our own 2 feet, be independent, whatever. So we've always kind of like had that emphasis on like uniformity and like connectedness and dialogue and all of that. That's like a central tenet of our education. So having said that, having been colonized, that was something that we learned a lot, and in fact it was mandatory. So in the national curriculum, or at least the one in the school that I went to, we all had to take Indonesian history and we all had to take religion. And so we would learn a lot about like, you know, our national heroes, like what these colonizers did to us, like the lasting impact that it's had on us and everything. But there was never really any talk about like what we were doing to other countries. Timor-Leste, like Papua, not a single like whisper of any of that in school.
I feel those are also very complicated stories and narratives to teach to kids. You know, we read an article in class like how to teach about the Holocaust. Like when it comes to colonization or decolonization, it's very hard to teach this in a classroom in the right way, I would say. Because, for example, you remember in our class one of our peers mentioned at the example of Germany of yes, they do teach about like what happened during World War II, but they also have a very simple narrative around that that gives a lot of shame to the students, and it does not really foster critical thinking. So what do you think? I mean, I know it's a very broad question and complicated, but like how should we teach about this? Like, as you just mentioned, for example, the fact that Indonesia was a colonizer, like, according to you, what is the most appropriate age, for example? What is the most appropriate way to teach about it? Like, without, you know, I don't know, like giving a feeling of either guilt or either not enough guilt, like, you know, like...
Well, actually, this is something that I've grappled with, like, quite a bit. Especially like in the early stages of like my epistemological revolution. Oh my god, wow, it sounds so fancy when I say it.
I love this word too.
No, I don't. Yeah, no, it's
very,
great.
very nice.
But yeah, no, like while I was like researching this, this kind of realization could be liberating and also like paralyzing at the same time. But it's still something so necessary to have, right? So when I was in this kind of like search to find answers, I started reading Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. And so she has like a moment where she says that children are more than capable of thinking critically. We just don't really treat them as such. Because in her own personal experience, you know, having grown up in a household with, I think, a lot of siblings, she always knew that like her dad hitting like his wife and his children was wrong. But her parents and her siblings all said that it was normal. And so she was more than capable of thinking about like why that was unacceptable, but growing up and with age, then it started to become normalized that she didn't even like see it as wrong anymore. And so I really kind of took to that. I mean like it's kind of the same thing as like when we're going through puberty. I'm gonna shift to like the neuroscience perspective now. Under like developmental psychology, children who are going through puberty, they more than understand the risks about doing what they're doing. They just don't care.
Yeah.
Like the part of their brain that recognizes risk recognizes it, but the part of the brain that says like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, is just turned off. Like it's not active. So basically, they more than us probably, they understand like, oh, I probably shouldn't be smashing this window because you know, people will yell, the police are gonna come, like it's just a bad thing. But I just don't care.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's cool. And so they smash that window. So it's kind of like the same thing with or at least in my head, it's kind of the same thing with like critical thinking. They're more than capable of doing it. In fact, like maybe children will be able to give us better perspectives into why exactly we've been like conditioned, and especially with time, to act and think the way that we do. But yeah, no, I think it's just like there needs to be an opportunity to foster that kind of critical thinking that may be afforded with like a good education, good in like the umbrella term, a great teacher, and also the right resources.
No, very relevant. I totally agree with you on that.
But you know, you might be more qualified to talk about hooks than me.
Well, yeah, no, but your reference and mentioning of like teaching to transgress is such a nice and important one in my opinion. And I agree with you that like the topic, those hard topic about colonization, whether it's like colonization or decolonization, should always be followed by a dynamic of critical thinking. Otherwise it becomes propaganda again. And I think like the core and the most important thing in those teaching is like critical thinking and making the child realizing why. And not like only the how it happened, also the why it should not happen again. And I think that often, like especially when we teach history, I don't know if you had this experience in Indonesia, but like in France, it's often very factual, only facts, and there's no meaning throughout the history. There's no like this was wrong and I'm going to explain you why. It was just like, oh, we did this, it's bad, and that's it, and that's it, and that's it. There's no like why it is bad. So the next question I'm going to ask you is a little bit different, but I've read that in Indonesia there's a very strong digital divide. I know that you worked a little bit in AI. What do you think about the use of AI in education? And then what do you think of the use in AI in Indonesia and Indonesian education? First, do you think that we should implement AI in our education? Because often people tend to say like, oh, but now it's part of our daily lives and we need to teach like children how to use it and everything. But we don't have to. We often like, the narrative is often like we have to because it exists, but there's a lot of stuff that exists that we don't teach children. It's like a choice that we're making. We don't have to like, you know, be like oppressed by it and like feel forced to teach it. I think it's a decision that we can make. And often people are like, oh no, we need to do it because it's so prevalent like today and it's so important. But I feel that, well, at the end of the day, it's still a choice. Do we include it in the education or not? And for example, I think it's very interesting into the Indonesian context because there's a huge digital divide. So I feel like implementing AI might like increase inequalities more than like, but I want to know like what you think.
No, I mean, for sure. I think it's, again, we're going back to like, we're asking these kids to bake a pizza without an oven, right? For a lot of Indonesian children, like, having a phone is still a privilege. Having like connectivity and everything. I think for sure it would be a great tool to help in, you know, understanding these like necessary life skills or whatever. I used to be really anti-AI, to be honest. I wouldn't even use ChatGPT. I don't know, it was just scary. It was scary to me.
Yeah, I understand that.
And I was always the type of person to value hard work and effort rather than results. But it wasn't until one of it was until like one of my boyfriend's friends said that like, oh, all right, like you don't want to use AI, that's fine. But just so you know, in 2 years, everybody else will be using AI and you will be left behind because you are insisting on like not using it. It's just like the way of life. Your bosses are using AI, your managers are using AI, your coworkers are using AI. And if you stand still in this, you're just, you might survive, but you're just not going to excel. And so I understand that from like a corporate point of view. From like a child in education, I don't really see the merit in that, especially with like, I think we undermine the way that like children are adapting to the tools at their disposal. For sure, like I see differences between me and my parents with the internet. You know, we could say the same argument about like, should we let children like, should we use the internet in teaching? Should we let children like surf the web like for their benefit, for their gain, for their knowledge? And this is probably like a debate that was happening like 20, 30 years ago. And we're doing the same thing with AI. And I think like there's no reason for it to be taught in schools because they already know how to use it, you know, if they had access to those resources. And so I think, you know, maybe there is some way that like this, maybe a young entrepreneur has thought about like kind of leapfrogging development or using it to help like children who don't have good school facilities, who don't have good teachers, to catch up to like their peers in more populated areas, more populated schools, like richer schools. But it's just not something that I see like replacing teachers or kind of becoming like a main source of information.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I think it can help. I'm just not seeing in what way realistically it would. I think it would be way more helpful for it to be used in, say, like teacher training, or like for teachers to make like workshops and everything. But it's still not going to replace the human touch.
I think that's a great thing that you just mentioned, how it can help teacher maybe more than students in the classroom. Building up on this, from a neuroscience perspective, do you know what are the bad aspects of like adding technology into classrooms, especially at a young age? Because I know that like as I was a teacher assistant in Kentwood's elementary school in LA in California, I've noticed that in the US, they use a lot of technology in the classrooms, like iPads for children, and they do games. Well, they're supposed to learn from those games, obviously, but it's still technology. It's still a screen. So do you know that, like, for example, like from a neuroscience perspective, what are like the damages it can cause, or?
Well, I'm not really sure about like damages it can cause. Like, I think everything has like an impact. You know, we have all this like debate about like, oh, should children be playing violent video games? Does it affect their personality?
Yes.
Like, yes, it does. The short answer is that yes, it does. At the same time, like that brings a whole like slew of like, how do we regulate children's internet use and everything.
Yeah.
I think when I was teaching, my classroom also had like these games that tech was actually a lifesaver in the class, because, you know, the teacher and I, we only had 4 eyes. It was not enough to keep just like glance at every single one of those 24 pupils who are climbing over the tables and like everything. Like they were just doing like the most. They were doing the most. And so keeping like order and decorum is already hard on its own. It's way better when they have like platforms where they can like play educational games and stuff like that and just be immersed in like their own chair and they're just doing stuff, you know? So it was like it's a really great like teaching assistant and classroom assistant as well, because, you know, if we're talking about like AI, I think this is an example of like a useful one. There was like this, I think this for their numeracy class, there was this program, or maybe it was like a website, but basically all these children would have this app on their tablets and they would play like initial assessment game, and so it would place them into like different like difficulties according to like their capabilities. And so every single time they like, you know, it's numeracy class time, whatever, they would they would log into their account and it would give them games that are tailored to their abilities in math, and so they can like level up and then whatever. And so that was like a really genius way of keeping the class in order, without the chaos of like paper and pen and movement. without us doing too much, and we could focus on like what we have to prepare for the next lesson and XYZ.
I feel that like from what I understand from what you were saying is that everything depends on like how we use it, for what we use it, and who use it also.
Yes, exactly.
So as a teacher assistant, that's relevant because often it's like, integrating AI in the classroom. And I feel like we often use like big words, technology, AI, but then it's like, there's multiple forms of it. Of course, there's technology as in like you watch a cartoon, which might be bad, but there's also technology as in like you're learning a new language. So it depends of like how we use it, who uses it, and like, all that kind of things.
Though I will say, this is the point that I was trying to make earlier. Okay. Though I will say that I think what's very, very useful and in fact necessary to teach children is how to use the internet correctly, and how to use AI correctly. I mean, like,
is there a correct way to use it?
Well, I wouldn't really say like I think there's definitely a correct way to use it. There's so many things that should not be touched by children on the internet at all. But I had a really simple class that I think left an impact on me. The class was learning how to do research.
Okay.
And so I gave this activity of like, okay, I wanted the class, like individually, for them to find an inspiring failure story, or I guess like it was like I was trying to find a famous figure who has failed at some point in their life, but has become famous now, made it on the other side. And you think about all these people like Walt Disney or like J.K. Rowling, or as problematic as she is. But it's on the internet, it's not that hard to find, right? Like a famous figure with an inspiring story. It was so difficult for these 11 and 12-year-olds. I swear to God, like I thought it was going to be a pretty simple class. You just like, literally copy paste the prompt into Google and it would show you like the first up that you click would probably have like 10 different figures with inspiring failure stories to like make up your Monday morning. But it was so much work for me to like, I had to patrol around the classroom 8 times because everybody had some difficulty or was like twisting it in some way. They were opening like Google Maps. Some of them were like taking stories from like images. Like it was so, what I thought was a simple task was so difficult for these kids to do because they didn't even know how to like, or like use like a website critically, like they would also be writing down like all the unimportant stuff. Like I literally asked them to write 1 paragraph, 3 sentences on like the figure, and they would just be copy pasting what was on the website.
Okay.
And so instead, from that one simple class, the teacher and I had to conduct 4 other classes just to follow up on that class, because as it turns out, these children don't really know how to use the internet.
Okay.
Just to find like an inspiring failure story from but I don't know if you're understanding the point. Like it was just,
I see, it's like more like the use, like
I think it's not something that we should shy away from, and they will learn at some point, but like it is just really surprising to kind of see it in action.
Also this makes me think of the fact that both in France and probably in Indonesia, like I feel we don't have like strong regulation regarding technology. You saw like the ban on TikTok that happened in the US, regardless of like the politics behind it. What the point I'm making here is that they were able to ban this app if they wanted to. And often I feel that like regarding especially the access to pornography and to not good informations and content on internet for kids, there's no strong regulation. I mean, if you want to access like under 18 content, you can, although you're underage, you know what I mean? And I feel like the government, all of them are really weak about that, and that's something that scares me a lot, because it feels that like technology is governing us more than we should be governing it. And this is something that I'm pretty like mad about.
I mean, like the internet didn't look the same way as when we were younger and accessing it. versus like how it is now.
Now in TikTok, it's so easy to like just end up in like videos and content that are not appropriate for children. But yeah, so that's thank you for this one. It's very, very relevant. I wanted also to ask you about the Minister of Education in Indonesia. I think his story and career is very interesting because he's also the founder of Gojek. Gojek, which is, for those who don't know, like the kind of the Uber of Indonesia, basically. But it's motorbikes mostly, but there's also cars and everything. So he's a businessman, but he's also the Minister of Education. And I think he has very, very progressive like ideas for education.
Yeah, he went to Brown.
Oh yeah, he studied. I mean, I can tell he studied in the US because
he had an accent.
And also like regarding the implementation and the changes he made into Indonesian education is really like US inspired implementation. So my question was, I mean, is about like what happened in 2019. So basically, he abolished the national examination in Indonesia in order to shift the focus from like rote memorization to assessing students more like their competences and their character, like more holistically, basically. So what do you think of that? And what do you think of like his politics in regard to education for Indonesia? Do you think that this Americanization of Indonesian education is a good thing?
The Americanization of
we could say it's a little bit an Americanization because I feel like the way he's like implementing policies and everything is very holistic, which I'm not criticizing this. I think it's great. But my question is more like, do you think he takes into consideration like Indonesian culture, or do you feel it's more like an Americanization of education? Or do you feel
I think it would be like a Finlandification. Having worked in consulting, I think I definitely see like the prevalence of like best practice policies, best practices.
Yes.
I guess in policy making on a national level. The intention is there. I mean, like, I don't think anybody in the Ministry of Education is just really has it like passing on their mind. Like they wake up every day and they think like, oh my God, I'm gonna mess up these children real bad. Like let's do it.
Of course.
Yeah, no, they obviously they want what's best for the children and everything.
Of course.
But I think like if we wanted to adopt, practices that are of a system, we need to have the infrastructure that supports it. And so, we can throw as many as many missions and visions and like plans and like hundreds of meetings for us about how we can move forward. But if we don't have the correct infrastructure to adapt to these curriculum changes and these demands, then we're already having difficulty now. Like it's just not going to, there's like, right now we're working towards a 2045, Indonesia's like golden year. And so what that is that we want to, by 2045, we want to be a developed country. Now, the road to that is tough. Yeah. So many challenges to it. And I think it's also, there's a whole load of factors that we don't really give much consideration about. To be honest, like it's not the quantity of schools. I think the first challenge would be like the quality of the teachers. So we have like 95% of Indonesians graduate primary school. I think it's 75% for middle school.
I think he worked on that.
Yeah.
And I think he did,
high schoolers as well, but only 20% of Indonesians go to university.
25?
Yeah, only 20.
20% of Indonesians go to university?
Yeah. It's not a lot. And if we're talking about like, I mean, I'm going to drop that statistic. I'm going to drop another statistic right here. So Indonesia is really, really large. We only put 3.8% of our national budget towards education.
Wow.
And that is not a lot compared to like other Asia Pacific, like countries in the Asia Pacific. They have like 4.8%. In Qatar, it's like 9.6. It's not a lot. The quantity is huge because Indonesia is massive and we have like trillions of money like coming in, but in ratio, it's just not a lot. And so how are we expected to adopt these like Finnish, adopt these Finnish like policies, when we don't have like the correct infrastructure, we're not like, schools don't even have updated textbooks, teachers are overwhelmed. Actually, you know what, like I think it was like 80 to 90% of primary school teachers only have like, don't even have a high school diploma. And I'm not talking about like Jakarta level, like I'm talking about like Indonesia level. Not everybody has a high school diploma when they teach.
Why do you think there's there's a lack of investments, obviously. But do you think there's also like, and I might be totally wrong here, but like a cultural refusal to like integrate like school? You know, like in class, Alia mentioned the fact that like in Pakistan, many people won't go to school because the school is not like them. The school is like made by other people, and so it's very like far from their values and their culture and everything, and so they don't go to the schools because the schools are not made for them, but more like made for them to fit in. And so there's a little bit of resistance from the people to go into those schools because, I mean, they just don't want to integrate something that is not going to help them properly.
Well, I
Do
think
you feel that this might be applicable in Indonesia?
I could see where that's coming from, but I do think with like the zonation system, and that has its own critiques and everything, with the with Curriculum Merdeka, or the current curriculum in place right now, the freedom curriculum. It gives teachers that autonomy to contextualize what they're teaching to the children. So that means that children in Papua won't be learning about like like Java-centric history, or they could provide like culturally relevant pedagogy. The thing that I would say probably is the biggest factor would be like the fact that teachers are overwhelmed, underpaid, and they don't know what to do with teaching their children. Like they're already dealing with so many other things, and now they have to make everyday lesson plans and XYZ. And also I think like the culture of teaching itself, like not everybody wants to be a teacher. Being a teacher is not a profession that's like highly regarded. Most of the time the attitudes towards like, you know, becoming a teacher is like, if your plan A, plan B, and plan C don't work, then you're just gonna go off and
we
start
have
teaching
the same
children.
Problem in a different manner, but like the fact that teachers are not valued in France also is a huge problem, and it's I guess the same in Indonesia.
Exactly.
I feel that's very complicated to shift, like the perception we have of teachers. So hard to shift. Like maybe there's something to do with the training. If they have a more like competitive training, they might be more respected. If they have a better pay, maybe if they're better paid, they will be more respected too.
No, it's just not like, I mean, we do respect them in a way that's like, oh, you're gonna go to heaven, like you're doing like the Lord's work or stuff like that. But it's just not something that like, you know, like if I were like your average Joe, I wouldn't really be thinking about this as like a career that's gonna make me a billionaire, you know? Why would I do that when I can make like TikTok content and then get like my salary from there, you know? And yeah, I think it's just, there's such a long way to go with, if we wanted to implement like, you know, this kind of creative freedom and all these other like practices that may work in a country that's smaller, richer, with a better quality of life, and also with respect to the teachers. But I just don't think that Indonesia is ready to be taking in like policies that don't necessarily reflect like the reality on the ground. You know, it's like that thing we read in like
top down, bottom up. You feel it's maybe too top down right now, like the way they're implementing new policies?
Well, I guess you could say so. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't listen to the grievances of like of the Indonesians, because right now we're actually holding demonstrations about like, you know, all these budget cuts to education. Yeah, that's one part of like a whole big piece. But you know, it's like what we read in like Maya and Alia's class. You can't take a plant from like where it's from and like pot it in a whole different piece of soil and expect it to grow, right? It needs like the right environment, it needs the right nutrition, it needs the right fertilizer, it needs all these other factors, the right climate for it to work. And we can't just snip like a leaf off and expect it to like propagate, you know? But yeah, it's still one that, you know, the answers I'm still trying to find, and I was hoping that by taking this degree I would at least find answers to that, because it just feels like this this itch, this like burning question that I want to find out more about. But, you know, up to this point, like what, halfway through our degree, I still haven't found the answers. And instead I just come out with more questions.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe that's the beauty of it. It's sad, it's happening to children now. The fact that they're not being provided with what we could be providing them, like they're not going to reach their potential just because, some dude decided on some policy. I'm not talking about the minister only.
No,
but
of
like a whole slew of factors that
but I feel what's very hard also in the context of Indonesia is like it's the biggest archipelago in the world, and there's so many diversity like within Indonesia. You have Hinduism in Bali, you have Christianity in Labuan Bajo, for example, and like the Muslim religion. But beyond all of that, there's also so many cultures that are different and communities. So, I mean, although we know that they have a very decentralized educational system, I feel it's so hard to provide like a curriculum that is adaptable to all of this diversity. And I think, but it's very interesting to have your insight. So do you feel on the ground that like there's an attempt to be more like bottom up rather than top down, and that people are, especially in schools, like more engaged into trying to make their education more close to their needs and cultures? I mean, it might be a hard question because that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I could give some insight on that. Like, I think a lot of NGOs are picking up the pieces, to be honest. Like, as much as teachers like tailor, like, their the way that they teach to this new curriculum for like students' development and stuff, it is a lot of work. And so at least like with the NGOs that I have been in contact with are usually the ones that are like doing all this extra work of thinking and like providing a more fulfilling education. And even then they are like with much difficulty, all they want to do is help, really. And like all they want to do is say to the government, hey, like we have this brilliant idea, it's been working in this school and that school and this school and that school, like why don't you try like kind of just implementing it in some way, like spreading it just for distribution and everything. And it's quite hard to get past like all these barriers to reach the government. And so if it's bottom up, it's most likely just more of an individual thing, case by case. Like there's not really, I don't think there's really kind of like appropriate measures in place, or like it works much in the way of like you got to know someone who knows someone who knows someone, then they'll probably give you a listening ear, or like someone, they're like, okay, we'll draft a letter and then I'll send it off and we'll see where it goes and where it lands and everything. But it's a whole bureaucratic process. Right.
From what you just said, I'm wondering, although you kind of touched on this already, but like how does corruption in Indonesia impacts education and children?
Bruh,
in your opinion?
Oh my God, I think we go back to like facilities and infrastructure and everything. Like, I mean, teachers already get like less of a pay anyway, but like, so funds don't go directly to schools. Funds go to the person in charge of like the area that a school is in. Or I guess I wouldn't really say the person, but like the local government, really. And so a lot of things get lost along the way. And so we have a lot of like schools that don't have roofs, they don't have like walls, they've got goats walking into the classrooms and everything. And so we just go back to this whole thing of like, all right, maybe we can have the most brilliant students in the classroom, we can have the best teacher, but do we have the infrastructure to support that, really? Do we have the resources to support that? Do we have, a good distribution system for textbooks of like the current year to be passed around? So it's a difficult one because the actions of one person could hinder like a child's future for a really long time, or give a lasting impact. But it definitely has an impact for sure. I think also one policy that I thought was a bit strange was when I was hearing about like COVID, or I think it was like emergency funds or like additional like funding for schools. So you can apply for that. The thing is, it's merit based. And I thought that was super interesting, because if it was merit-based, then that means that your students must do well for you to apply for additional funding. But how are your students going to be doing well if you don't have the money to teach the students? And so, yeah, I guess we just kind of have a lot of these kind of regulations in place that no one really like blinks two eyes about. It's just always been there. It just works this way, and there's not really much that we could say about it, or at least me, being here and everything. And I still think I have so much to learn about the education system back home. As much as I am Indonesian, I had 18 years there, and learning the Indonesian curriculum, I still went to colonial institution 1, colonial institution 2, and I've been in the UK for the last 5 years. I think I still need to touch grass and like touch ground, touch base, like reconnect, while also being conscious about how my privilege has gotten me to learn this much and also form an opinion this much, while also staying rooted. And that I think is a challenge for me, to look at the Indonesian education system and then also to provide valid critiques and valid solutions to these challenges as well.
Are you planning on going back to Indonesia after
my degree?
After your degree, or maybe after a little bit of experience in the UK, like, do you want at some point return back in Indonesia?
I think I'd like to get a bit more experience in the UK at this point. Yeah, I'm still just going to focus on my own personal development.
Great.
And,
my last question for you, SJ, is if there's one thing you could change in the educational system right now of Indonesia, what would it be and why? Only one thing.
Only one thing. I'd delete the entire zonation system, the zoning system.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw that to the bin. So it's this policy that was recently implemented on where you are going to be allocated for school, where students are allocated for school, and that is based on like the geographical area that your family card and your card is in. It's honestly terrible. Like, there's no way to sugarcoat it. Like, people are being allocated to schools that are actually way out of their convenience. Like, you just get like lumped in. There's no competition. There's no need. There's no drive for students to do well, because they know that they will pass their classes and they know that they will get allocated to a school. There's no drive for achievement. It's missing, honestly. And I used to be of the opinion that like competition is bad and we should be like focusing on like the individual development of these children. But we have high schoolers that can't read. It's honestly so jarring to see, because it goes back to like just policy making in general. I don't think anybody wakes up with like malice in their hearts to be like, I'm gonna ruin this kid's future just to make up my shitty Monday morning. Maybe born out of good intentions, but it's not really working with the way that Indonesia is now, and the way that it's structurally is.
It makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, I think that would probably be like the first knee-jerk like policy that I would have, and also to pour more money in. Honestly, just more of the GDP.
That's two things, but I totally see what you mean. I understand that. There's so much we could have been talking about. Like, for example, while you were speaking, I was thinking about like the role of NGOs in Indonesia and what they do and everything. But we might do a second episode to touch upon like everything, because Indonesia and education so fascinating but so huge. That is the end of our interview.
Yay!
Thank you very much, SJ, for coming and for letting me interviewing you. It was a pleasure to have you.
Yay!